Are you ready for more independence as a financial advisor? Are you ready for more growth and control over your future? The Independent Registered Investment Advisor, or RIA, model might be right for you. There are many paths to independence, and Schwab Advisor Services has helped thousands of advisors make the move with confidence. From defining your vision to successfully transitioning your clients, Schwab helps you build your roadmap to independence. To find your path, start with Schwab Advisor Services at advisorservices.schwab.com/paths today.
Dear McDonald's, your breakfast menu? Fire. 10s across the board. I could be happy with anything, even though I order the same thing every time. Thanks for not judging me. I'll try something new next time. Maybe.
Score a 2 for $5 deal on a sausage McMuffin with egg and more. Limited time only. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Single item at regular price.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
In the 1970s, acid rain was a big environmental worry in North America, thanks to coal power plants and cars. And you could actually see the damage from dead fish to destroyed forests. So changes were made, and it's no longer a concern. But something else popped up in its place: plastic rain. And not many people are talking about it yet. I'm Kris McCusker, and in this episode of The Big Story, we take a closer look at the issue, what it is, and how do we avoid it. Benji Jones is an environmental correspondent at Vox in New York, and you recently wrote an extensive piece on this issue. Thanks for taking some time to talk to us about it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me here.
I want you to tell us, first and foremost, as a fellow journalist, I'm curious, what prompted you to write this piece?
Yeah, certainly not because I was looking for more things to be worried about. I actually had a conversation with an environmental attorney. Like sometimes when I'm doing interviews, I'll have a couple minutes at the end to just ask what they're thinking about, what's keeping them up at night. We're talking about pollution in the environment. We're talking about forever chemicals and microplastics. And this attorney just mentioned to me that microplastics are so pervasive that they're actually in the rain. And that thought just really stuck with me. And then I started looking into it and was like, oh my God, like this is true. There are really good studies that show this. And so I felt very compelled to write about it as an indicator of how polluted the environment is.
And you sort of liken it to what we saw with acid rain many decades ago. Was that a parallel that you drew, or is that one that others had drawn?
I'm not sure that I was the first to make that comparison, but I hadn't seen kind of modern pollution in our rain compared to acid rain. And so, and that was important to me because acid rain was such a big environmental problem back in the 70s and 80s. And it really rose to the level of the public. Like people were really talking about it. And I had felt like there was this sort of understanding that acid rain is no longer a thing. And then I was like, wait a second, this seems in some ways worse than acid rain. And while that's sort of a depressing thought, I think there's also hope in the fact that we figured out what to do about acid rain for the most part. And so maybe there's a way out of this problem as well.
Okay, I want to come back to that. But first, walk us through this idea of plastic rain and how pervasive plastic has become in our environment.
So there are all kinds of pollutants in the environment. So often when we think about pollution, it's the stuff that we can see. It's like physical pieces of trash. So plastic bags, water bottles, whatever on the side of the road or in rivers. But there's all this pollution, modern pollution that we can't see. And those are the sort of kinds of pollution that are scariest to me because we don't know how bad they are. And so those are things like microplastics, which are little tiny bits of plastic that are less than 5 millimeters. And also things like PFAS, the so-called forever chemicals, and things like pesticides too. And when you start looking into where these pollutants are, they're basically everywhere. That is the point that I think like a lot of news stories drive home, and I want to drive home. Scientists really can't find places on the planet, in our bodies, that do not have microplastics and PFAS. Like these chemicals are just everywhere. And so it's no surprise that because they're so pervasive in the environment, because we're finding them in our brains, in our snow, in the deepest trenches of the ocean, it's not surprising that they're also in the rain. So the way that I think about microplastics and PFAS, and especially microplastics, because they really are just everywhere, is like they're almost like part of the planet now. Just as fungi and microbes and whatever bacteria are like integrated into our ecosystems, a part of our ecosystems. Some of these pollutants are so pervasive that they're now part of our water cycle. And so when I talk about plastic rain or kind of the polluted rain of today, I'm thinking about all these small chemicals and these small pollutants like microplastics and PFAS that are inside the rain. So when it's raining, those chemicals are coming with the water.
I want to clarify one thing. What is a PFA?
Oh, sorry, PFAS. That's
Okay.
So PFAS is the shorthand for forever chemicals, and the word PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. So it's like it's a class of chemicals. There are thousands of PFAS chemicals that comprise PFAS, but they're basically a bunch of different chemicals that are used in a number of different products like nonstick pans, tents, and rain jackets, carpeting, and they're used because they're very good at repelling water and oil.
Okay, so it's a chemical rather than a type of plastic.
PFAS is a group of chemicals, exactly.
Okay. All right, so circling back, like I understand how these things end up in our water, but can you explain the jump to the rain?
I know, right? Okay, so basically, there are a couple of different ways that something like microplastic could get into the rain. A big one is our highways. So when you think about cars driving along the road, the tires are made of rubber and synthetic materials, and they will degrade over time and spit out these little bits of plastic. So tires themselves, as they degrade, can create microplastics. And then also, when cars are driving on the road, they're breaking up a lot of trash that's on roadways, like plastic bottles, into tiny little bits of plastic. And when plastic gets broken down to small enough size, it becomes light enough to get picked up by wind, by air, and that it becomes part of the atmosphere. And once plastic is in the atmosphere, which we know it is, I mean, they find microplastics in clouds, literally. Once it's in the air, it can basically go anywhere. And so that's one source. So once you have plastic from the roadways, microplastic from the roadways gets picked up by the air, then it's in the atmosphere and it can get taken anywhere. And then when it rains, the raindrops kind of like scavenge pollutants in the atmosphere. So literally a raindrop might hit a piece of microplastic and then absorb it into the raindrop, and then it falls out with the rain. And so weirdly, rain is actually fairly purifying for the air, but then the rain itself is dirty. So yeah, roadways, one source. There's also research showing that the oceans are a big source of microplastics in the rain. A lot of plastic enters the ocean every year. We see it in the plastic straw in a sea turtle. We see animals getting caught up in like the 6-pack holders. Plastic in the ocean is a big problem. There's a lot of it. And over time, that plastic can degrade, become microplastics. And when literally like waves on the beach are crashing to shore, that like turbulence can launch microplastics into the atmosphere, or even when there are bubbles popping on the surface of the ocean, that can also launch microplastics into the air. And again, once they're airborne, they can go anywhere and be rained out. So the roads and the ocean are a really big source. Now, when we talk about other pollutants, so forever chemicals, these PFAS, as I mentioned, those can enter the atmosphere just by evaporation. So if you have a source of pollution, so a factory that's leaking PFAS into a lake or a stream, and then that water in the lake or the stream evaporates, the PFAS can evaporate with it and become airborne that way, and then similarly get rained out once it's already in the atmosphere. So a simple way of putting this is that these chemicals are already in the atmosphere, and when it rains, the rain actually will take them out of the atmosphere and put them into the rainfall and then into the ground.
Are you ready for more independence as a financial advisor? Consider the RIA model. Schwab Advisor Services has helped thousands of advisors make the move. To find your path, start with Schwab at advisorservices.schwab.com/paths today.
Dear McDonald's, your breakfast menu, fire. Tens across the board. I could be happy with anything, even though I ordered the same thing every time. Thanks for not judging me. I'll try something new next time. Maybe.
Score a 2 for $5 deal on a sausage McMuffin with egg and more. Limited time only. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Single item at regular price.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
So, if I really oversimplify what you just outlined, like acid rain, this sounds man-made.
Completely. This is a man-made problem. This is a problem of our own making.
And it's, years and decades of damage has been done to this point.
In some ways, this is a new phenomenon. We are making more and more of these pollutants now. So these are modern pollutants. We didn't see this much plastic in the 60s and the 50s and the 40s. Plastic is much more present today. And so the plastic rain of today is definitely more plasticky, if you will, than it would have been back in the era of acid rain, for example. So this is like a new version of dangerous rainfall.
So this is the latest kind of situation, the latest climate or environmental concern. Why are people not screaming from the rooftops about this like they were about acid rain?
As a fair question. So I think a couple things. Maybe the big one is that there are a lot of things to worry about. There are a lot of other environmental problems. Climate change is a big problem. And people can feel the effects of climate change in a very concrete way. So we see more intense hurricanes, more intense droughts and heat waves that really affects the day-to-day of people's lives. So I think there are other problems like that are just more in our face. Air pollution is also pretty in our face in certain regions of the planet. And so I think that is more evident for folks. So like the smoke from wildfire, for example, entered New York City a couple of years ago. And that was very much in the conversation as a result of being so visible. And I think to compare what's happening with the rain now to something like acid rain, I mean, in many ways, acid rain was more visible than what's happening now too, because we would see like statues look as if they were melted and we saw die-offs of fish. And that's not to say that what's happening with the rain today is not contributing to all kinds of problems, some of them a lot scarier. I mean, we know that chronic illnesses are linked to pollutants like microplastics and PFAS and could be contributing to the crisis of chronic illness that so many politicians are talking about today. But it's just not as easy to connect the dots, I think. And then again, this is also just more recent, and there isn't a lot of evidence of this. I mentioned that there are some good studies, but there actually isn't a ton of research showing the problem with our rain today. And that's partly because, as scientists have told me, it's quite difficult to study really small quantities of things like PFAS and microplastics in rainfall. So I think like over time we'll get more research to understand the risk that this poses. But right now there just isn't that much known.
But it is notable for another reason.
There's this study in Science that I really kind of built a lot of the story around. And it was basically just showing how much plastic is being rained out on protected areas in the Western US. And that was really compelling to me because these are areas like the Grand Canyon, Joshua Tree National Park, Bryce Canyon, areas that are not near major human developments, major cities. And so you wouldn't expect them to be polluted from something like rain. Maybe people dropping their plastic bottles on the paths or something like that. And the researchers behind the study found that indeed there was a lot of plastic being rained out in these national parks. And so that was like, whoa, even in remote areas, there's plastic falling from the sky. And so nowhere on the planet is really safe from this phenomenon.
I do like to end on a positive note. And you sort of teased this at the beginning of our chat. How do we fix this?
So there's like the big hard solution, which is we need to be producing less plastic and we need to be producing fewer chemicals that are harmful to humans and to nature. And as a species, we're very innovative. This should not be so difficult. We should be able to find better materials, better substances that can replace the harmful chemicals. And if we move beyond chemicals like PFAS or forever chemicals, like let's try not to replace them with equally harmful ones. So thinking carefully about what can we create products with that is not gonna pollute the environment. So like reforming the products that we make. And I should just say, one of the kind of striking things I learned while reporting this story, this is for the US, in the US at least, you don't need a lot of testing for chemicals before they go into consumer products. So we're not talking about food in this case, but like if you're creating a container for something, a bottle, you don't necessarily need to prove the safety of chemicals used to make those things if they're not for consumption. But if they break down into the environment, we might be consuming them through drinking water anyway. So fixing our systems, that's the big hard one. That's the most important. Producing less plastic, absolutely essential. And there are some global efforts to make that happen. Countries around the world are currently negotiating a plastics treaty, which is meant to reduce the amount of plastic entering the environment. So that's important. But the thing I also like to tell folks, to tell readers, to tell listeners is that there are things you can do in your own life right now that will limit your exposure to a lot of these substances. So, for example, filtering your water. That's probably the most obvious one. So get a reverse osmosis system installed in your home if you don't already have one, if you can afford it, or use pitcher filters like a Brita or Zero Water, or even a filtering water bottle. So that can really help. There's some evidence that using tap water over bottled water is better from a plastics perspective. So you'll get fewer microplastics in your body by drinking tap water. Educate yourself about how clean your water is. Most governments have like websites that tell you if you have PFAS, or you can ask. Hopefully people have that opportunity to find out what's in their own water. And then also things like don't microwave your food in plastic containers. Use glass containers if you're microwaving. Takeout wrappers often have PFAS. So does like dental floss. So look into what chemicals go into your products. And I think that like maybe I'll leave everyone with that point, which is just do a little bit of work to try to figure out like what you're most exposed to, what goes into the things you're eating, the products you're using, and try to avoid chemicals to the extent that you can. So there are things that we can do to reduce our exposure.
I mean, as an example, it takes what, like a 20 years for a plastic bag to break down?
Plastic lasts in the environment for a long time. Even the like supposedly compostable plastic products like the cutlery that you sometimes get, like probably are not great. So just try to reuse when you can. Try to use metal silverware if you have it. And the other thing I want to say is clean your house, because dust has a lot of microplastics in it. So like if you're constantly vacuuming and mopping, like that should benefit your health over time. So clean up.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating read, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about it today.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Benji Jones is an environmental correspondent at Vox in New York. You can find more of his writing at vox.com. That's another episode of The Big Story. Your feedback is always welcome at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. I'm Kris McCusker. Thanks for listening.
Are you a financial advisor considering the independent RIA model and wondering where to start? Start with Schwab Advisor Services. They've helped thousands evaluate the full range of options and can help you determine your best path forward. Start your journey today at advisorservices.schwab.com/paths.
Dear McDonald's, your breakfast menu? Fire. 10s across the board. I could be happy with anything, even though I order the same thing every time. Thanks for not judging me. I'll try something new next time. Maybe.
Score a 2 for $5 deal on a sausage McMuffin with egg and more. Limited time only. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Single item at regular price.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.